Good afternoon, everyone. This is the October 24th, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee. And may I have a roll call, please?
Yes, Committee Member Alejandro Gutierrez.
Here.
Committee Member Harmon.
Here.
Committee Chair Friedman.
Here. We are all present. So first, is there any public comment for items not on today's agenda but under the purview of the Finance Committee? Not seeing any in chambers. Are there any online?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
I will close general public comment. And we do have two items today, so I'll turn it over to item one, and I believe that'll be Ms. Doubles, and this is in regards to the property located at 821 Bath Street.
Thank you, Chair Friedman and committee members Gutierrez and Harmon. I'm Laura Doubles. I'm the Housing and Human Services Manager for the city. And here with me today is Cindy Young, the Executive Director for Santa Barbara Community Housing Corporation. Thank you for having us here today to present to you a proposal for a restructure of the Community Housing Corporation's loan on real property located at 821 Bath Street. Next slide, please. And on the screen here is the staff's recommendation that the Finance Committee consider and recommend that City Council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving a restated loan agreement with Santa Barbara Community Housing Corporation, a California nonprofit public benefit corporation, secured by a restated deed of trust and a new 90-year affordability control covenant imposed on real property located at 821 Bath Street, and authorizing the Community Development Director to execute such agreements subject to approval as to form by the City Attorney as necessary. The borrower and property manager is Santa Barbara Community Housing Corporation. 821 Bath Street is a multi-family property with 12 total residential units, 11 two-bedrooms, and one one-bedroom unit. And on the screen here is a picture of the property so you can see it. Next slide, please. And on July 14th, 1989, CHC acquired the property with assistance by the city's RDA. The RDA provided a $470,000 loan based on residual receipts repayments for the acquisition and rehabilitation of the property. The city also recorded an affordability covenant on the property for 30 years back then. The loan matured back on July 14th, 2019, and is currently in default. The affordability covenant also expired on the property at that time, so there's no recorded affordability covenant presently on the property. However, CHC does have as their mission affordable housing, so they have still continued to restrict that property with the same terms as what the covenant from the city has been to this date. Next slide, please. So the $470,000 city loan did expire after the 30-year term. However, it is still earning the 4.5% interest, and it is based on residual receipts payments. And just as a reminder, residual receipt payments are calculated annually by taking the property revenue minus all the costs. And if there is a positive net cash flow, then a payment is due to the city for that year. As of October 1st, 2023, the accrued interest is $443,821, bringing the total loan balance to $913,821. And CHC has provided payments totaling $256,815 over the life of the loan received to date. Next slide, please. Staff is proposing the restructured terms as on the screen. To extend the loan with an amortized monthly payment over 30 years so as to ensure full repayment upon maturity. It will continue at 4.5% interest with payments of approximately $3,632 per month total. That breaks down into the following. The $470,000 original principal will be extended 30 years, and those payments would be $2,382 per month. And the approximate $450,000 in accrued interest will also be amortized over 30 years, but that will be at a 0% interest to avoid compounding. And those payments are approximately $1,250 per month. And the reason for approximation is that these amounts will vary slightly according to when we close the loan date. So every day it accrues a certain daily interest, so that would be added on as well. And on the screen here, you can see just a breakdown, the original principal and the unpaid accrued interest that is remaining. That balance was as of October 1st, 2023, for a total of $913,821. Next slide, please. And the proposed restructured loan, same figures, just wanted to reiterate that the principal balance will be still accruing 4.5% interest. It will be at a 30-year amortization. And the balance of the unpaid accrued interest was as of October 1st, 2023, and will be adjusted. CHC has agreed to record a new 90-year covenant expiring in 2114 on the property in exchange for the loan restructure terms. The restriction categories will be as follows. 5 units will be restricted to 80% AMI and below, which is low income category. And per CHC's request, they want further restriction on 7 units to 50% AMI and below, which is very low income. The income restrictions may float between units upon vacancies. This provides flexibility for CHC to place different income level households in vacant units, as long as the overall unit count remains compliant with these totals. Next slide, please. And in summary, the city is working with the agency's request to cure the loan default and to allow a loan extension to sustain the affordable units. Amortized payments with a payoff in 30-year term will provide for financial stability for the property. And it'll allow the city to retain housing for low and very low income households. And the city will be able to record a new 90-year affordability covenant expiring in 2114 to ensure those restrictions. Next slide, please. And we're back to staff's recommendations slide. And both Ms. Young and myself are here for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Right, open it up to questions from my colleagues. All right, I do have one, and it's somewhat related, but we see a lot of, not a lot, but these come up where the 90-year covenants come up and there hasn't been the ability to reinvest in the property because of access to capital as part of it. So would it be possible, using this as an example and some others that have come up, to have an item come back to us informational on just what are some of, and this may be to Ms. Doubles or Mr. DiMartini actually, to work with community development to come back and say, what are the best practices and best options to, one, ensure that we have adequate reinvestment in properties and are creating, we're not missing out on opportunities for affordable housing, because we've seen a number of these that have come back to us. So is that something that, using this as an example, that we could have a future item on?
Chair Friedman, yes, absolutely. Finance and community development staff can work together to explore that topic much more thoroughly, and then bring it on to the Finance Committee for an informational session to discuss options for future consideration.
Okay, thanks. And it's just because I'm supportive of this today, but I just, we've had a few of these that have come up, and it just got me asking those questions. So I don't have any other specific questions to this property, so please, go ahead.
Ms. Doubles, you had mentioned that the loan was not up, the payments were not up to par. Does it have anything to do, could you explain like why the loan payments are not up to date?
Thank you, Chair Friedman and Committee Member Gutierrez. So the payments have all been made whenever they've been due. So residual receipt loan payments are like calculated on their financials after a year has gone by. We go in and we make sure if there's any net positive cash flow, that then a payment would become due for that next year for them to pay. So as you can see, they've paid their payments, but in a structure such as that, a lot of times after the 30 years has expired, they haven't made enough payments. And that's very typical in affordable housing development, in that by that 30-year term, you still end up having a balloon payment, per se, to pay off at that point. So we do that in order to encourage development of affordable housing, knowing that that's a mechanism we can use to at least get it developed, but it very often comes down to, at the end, where we have to either restructure or try to figure out, a lot of times the developers will go and get loans, commercial loans to pay us off, or something to that effect. So there is that aspect to it. I think that's what you're maybe asking. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for
Okay,
that
sure.
clarification. And Mr. Friedman, your question is to resolve
It's
the
just
issue.
looking at, it gets to this issue, this very
Okay.
issue is at the end of the 30 years or whatever, however long it is, usually 30 years, we have this issue where the balloon payment comes up, and then we either have to restructure it, and then we add like another 90-year covenants, or, during the course of that time, if interest rates are like they were a few years ago, were historically low, that they might not have access to conventional capital to actually get a lower interest rate through the markets rather than with us. So it could have been an opportunity for them to lower their interest rates. But just the way we are right now, it's great that we have these. I mean, I look at 2114 and I'm like excited that we have affordable housing that long. But if we are missing opportunities to create more affordable housing or reinvestment in that housing, so that's what my questions were about, to the
Perfect.
point you're making.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Member Harmon?
On that note, while we're talking about this potential informational item, I think Chair Friedman alluded to this, but the element of this conversation that I'm particularly interested in, that I'm hoping you all can discuss, is just sort of options for accessing capital to reinvest in the company. In the development, because we've heard so much about the impacts of these affordability covenants on the potential financing to allow for the property owners to reinvest. So what are the options if we have these covenants on the property? Can people still access financing to reinvest and do renovation? So that's sort of very much related to what Chair Friedman was talking about, but I want to make sure, for me, that element's particularly of interest. Is there an option, or what are the sort of consequences and balancing that we do? Thank you.
All right, thank you. So now I'll open up to public comment. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Stubbles. Are there any members of the public in chambers that wish to speak to this item? Not seeing any. I'll close. I have public comment online. Is there any online, Ms. Nichols?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
All right, I will close public comment and turn it over to my colleagues. We do have a staff recommendation, so. Member Harmon?
Thank you, Chair Friedman. This is excellent work. Thank you so much. This is really important and incredibly well done, as always, and love to see, despite the challenges that come with affordability covenants, as we were just discussing, this is hugely important. And I always, it's just very moving, actually, and in a finance committee sort of way, to see something that's going to extend into 2100 when, we are certainly not sitting on this dais. So really just my thanks, and I'm very happy to move staff recommendation.
I second.
Motion's been made and seconded. And I'll just echo the comments. I think the ability to have that 90 years up into 2114, and maybe our AI selves will be here then, but we won't be. But I appreciate the ability to have the affordable housing from the Community Housing Corporation, and reinvesting in this property in this way and managing it so that we can have, critical members of our community able to afford to live here. So I appreciate the partnership that we have. And with that, motion's been made and seconded. I'll do a call for a vote. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed, abstentions? Not hearing any. Passes unanimously. Thank you. And now we will move on to item 2, which is the recommended adoption of a pension managee policy and Section 115 trust. I'll turn that over to Mr. DiMartini.
Good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Keith DiMartini, the city's finance director, and we're here to talk about a proposed pension management strategy policy and then also opening up a Section 115 trust. Before I jump into the presentation, I have a few staff and other folks to acknowledge. First, I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Jessica Yates, the city's accounting supervisor. She did a tremendous amount of work to get this item ready for the Finance Committee's consideration today. Thank you very much, Jessica. I'd also like to acknowledge some of our partners that the city will be planning to partner with to manage our pensions trust going forward. First, we have Mr. Mitch Barker from PARS. It stands for Public Agency Retirement Services. This firm specializes in administering the Section 115 trusts for pension and other post-employment benefit liabilities for municipalities such as us. And then I'd also like to introduce Mr. Tori Milazzo. He is a consultant, senior portfolio manager with Highmark Capital, and they are an owned subsidiary of U.S. Bank, which is the city's bank, and they will serve as the investment advisory firm for the funds that sit in our trust. And so they'll be helping me with the presentation today. The objective for the presentation today is to first recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution approving of a pension management policy. Second, to recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution approving the establishment of a post-employment benefits trust, known as a 115 trust, administered by Public Agency Retirement Services, or PARS, by appointing the city's finance director as plan administrator, authorizing the plan administrator to execute the agreement for administrative services, and establish the investment policy statement with PARS, and recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution appropriating the transfer of funds from enterprise, internal service, and other funds from available reserves into the 115 trust in fiscal year 2024. So the agenda for this item is to first provide a quick overview of pensions, where we have been, where we've come. We've had multiple presentations with Finance Committee thus far, and where we are now heading. We'll also talk about the major items that are included in the proposed pension management policy and the strategies that we are hoping to implement with opening the trust, and then of course take questions and discussion. This is a slide we presented to Finance Committee before. This is the process that we started about 2 years ago to first educate the committee and the public about our pension costs and our liability, analyze the impacts of those based on actuarial assumptions, and then present strategies and options for the Finance Committee to consider. We've received your direction in prior meetings, and we are now before you today to ask you to recommend adoption of the policy and opening up the trust. And then we will move into administering these programs going forward with continual reevaluation at presentations to Finance Committee in the future. So first, let me just spend a few minutes talking about our pension costs and our pension liability. We pay CalPERS what's called our normal cost, which is the rate that employers pay for every employee that will receive a pension benefit in the future, and employees also pay a contribution as well. For miscellaneous employees, which is everybody that's non-public safety, the city pays between 10 to 12% based on their annual salary. For safety employees, police and fire, the city pays 20 to 22% of their annual salary, and that is paid every pay period, so every 2 weeks. The city also is responsible for paying an annual portion related to the unfunded actuarial liability. And that UAL exists on the city's balance sheet as a liability, and it represents the present value of what we, the city, will have to pay in the future for current employees and retiree pension benefits. A UAL exists or it increases when CalPERS does not earn the rate of return that they hope to earn. And it also exists when people live longer, when they draw down their pension benefits for a longer period of time. And then there are other factors as well. Our UAL payment to CalPERS is projected to increase within the next 4 to 5 years. So it's important that we address our pension liability now. There are risks and uncertainty with this. The costs are becoming unsustainable. It's taking away from other priority programs that council may want to direct those resources to. The annual costs of our pension contribution outweigh the annual revenue growth that we receive from our tax sources. And that liability compounds with interest. So these are some of the things that we have been considering and working with Finance Committee over the past couple of years. This slide here shows the historical rate of return that CalPERS has earned on their investment portfolio. They target a rate of return of 6.8%. That's called their discount rate. And you can see that they have, in many years, earned far greater than that. But on many years also, they have earned far below that. Anytime their rate of return is below the discount rate, it increases our UAL. It increases the liability on our balance sheet. And the opposite is true. In 2021, when they earned 21.3%, our UAL went down pretty significantly. But this graph shows you that it is rather volatile. In 2023, the rate of return was 5.8%, so pretty close to what they were targeting at 6.8%. But again, that will have the effect of increasing the liability on our balance sheet as well. This slide shows what, over the past 3 years, all of the over 4,000 CalPERS member agencies, what their funded status is. And so the optimal funded status is 100%, meaning that agency doesn't have a liability on their financial statements. But you can see the vast majority of CalPERS members do have a liability. Santa Barbara is hovering in that sort of lower quartile area where we have a funded status level of around 68 or 69%. So we are, far away from achieving 100%, but we have things to do, which is why we're here before you today. As part of Vision 2030, as part of fiscal sustainability, the Finance Department has a core performance metric of a goal, a very aggressive goal of wanting to achieve a 90% funded status. And so implementing a pension management policy, opening up a trust, making additional payments to CalPERS is all in the same concept, the same strategy of increasing our unfunded status level. This slide here gives a quick overview of our pension liability as a city. You can see the vast majority, about 51% of our unfunded actuarial liability is for everybody that's non-public safety, and then 28% is for police and 21% is for fire. The graph on the bottom left of this slide shows our unfunded liability of over $400 million. That's projected in fiscal year 2025, and a funded status of around 68, 69%. You can see how it varies depending on the year, depending on how CalPERS' investment portfolio performs. And then the bar chart on the right shows the projected payment that we will have to make to CalPERS just for the annual contribution for the unfunded liability. You can see that there's a little bit of a dip in 25, 26 based on the actuarial assumptions being used, but it again continues to go up into 27, 28, into fiscal year 2030, which is as far out as the actuarial tables go. So now let's talk about how we're going to manage this going forward. Back in December of 2021, we were before you and you provided direction to us to go ahead and analyze this further and bring back recommendations for next step. At that time also, there was a county grand jury report, which the city responded to, and we went ahead and communicated our plan to update our reserve policies, create a policy, and then also plan to implement a trust. Staff went to work, and this issue about managing our pension costs was one of multiple items that falls under the umbrella of Vision 2030 and fiscal sustainability, which was presented in great detail to this committee back in June of 2022. So really taking a holistic forward-thinking, comprehensive view at all of the things that we need to do as an organization to become more fiscally sustainable. Managing our pension costs is just one of them. Back in December of 2022, so not just a year ago, the City Council took an action to update the city's reserve policy to effectively establish a pension stabilization reserve, which was one of the strategies that we communicated earlier. So this first section on this slide was a change that council approved back then, which was instead of having 50% of any operating surplus go to capital improvements, instead, we will use that surplus to go towards our pension costs. So that was an action that council took not just a year ago. So here we are today. We are working towards implementing a Section 115 trust, considering making additional payments to CalPERS to draw down that liability. And then beyond this, there still might be work to do. There are other tools, there are other strategies that we could look at in the future, but this is a starting place. So now I'd like to ask Mr. Mitch Barker if he could stand up, please. He's going to present an overview of why the Section 115 trust is important and how we will use it.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. There we go. Is that working now? Yes. Okay. So good afternoon. My name is Mitch Barker, Executive Vice President with PARS. Been with them for 20 years. It is really a pleasure to be in front of you. I've been talking to the city for over 10 years about this concept. In my opinion, every successful program needs somebody, a champion, to finally take it and run with it and get it to the finish line. And thank you, Keith, for making that happen. We're close. We've got 4 programs at PARS, and I focus only on this program, 115 Trust. Working with cities, counties, and special districts. We have a number of agencies that are in the same trust on the 101, and I've been fortunate, along with Tori, to help them get there. The overall idea is to improve your balance sheet and give you options that prepare for anything that happens in the future, whether it be an emergency or a bad budget year. And that's one of the beauties of this 115 Trust tool. The first bullet point here, invest cash at higher expected rates of return compared to city's portfolio. This is possible because there's 2 California investment government code sections, one for the general fund and one for assets not in the general fund, such as CalPERS, such as the 115 Trust. Your general fund is restricted. You can't invest in equities for good reason. That money needs to be there to pay your operating expenses. On the 115 Trust, we operate under the same California government code as CalPERS, meaning we can invest the assets in a prudent manner in a diversified way. And that's really Tori's area that he's going to expand on in a second, but we wanted to get this concept in front of you as to why we have the potential to earn a greater rate of return than the general fund. The idea becomes, what's the right risk tolerance level? And again, Tori will go over the options. Number 2, it's irrevocable. That was a scary word in the early days of the 115 Trust when it first came out 15 years ago. Folks said, well, if it's irrevocable, how do I ever even get to it? Well, it's usable. It just has to be used for the purpose in which it was funded into the trust. And those 2 post-employment benefits are pension, and the other one's OPEB, also known as retiree medical benefits. You have both post-employment benefits. But the main purpose, the main use that I understand Keith wants to go down the path on is the pension side. And I agree with that strategy. You got to focus on one first. I think pension's the bigger issue. Discretion over when to use the funds. They are restricted in that it can only be used for pension, but you decide when you put the money in, how much you put in, when you take it out, and also how much you take out. So that's the discretion of the plan administrator, I'm sure, along with the council's guidance. Reduce future demand on operating funds. You'll see one of the graphs coming up where expenses appear to exceed your budget. Where can you go to help make up that differential? The 115 Trust. That's one of the beauties of this thing. It's there for you. Think of it as a rainy day fund. Think of it as a safety net. But again, the one restriction is can only be used for pension. But that's okay because you clearly have uses for the pension coming up. Options for various appetites to risk. Again, we've got 5 risk tolerance levels. Tori's going to go over what those are, what the expected rates of return are, and also what's the most common choice. Discretion on disbursements and deposits. Again, the plan administrator and the council makes that decision ultimately, so you have control over that. You can reimburse yourself for pension-related expenses, or you can send the money to CalPERS down the road, called an additional discretionary payments. So it gives you these options. So in general, you want to think of this as really another form of a pension reserve, only it's not inside your general fund, it's in the 115 trust. By having the 115 trust, you then have that opportunity to earn a greater rate of return than your general fund. That's it for now.
Mr. Barker, thank you very much. So now we'll move on here. I'll ask Mr. Milazzo to come up and help me present this slide. So this slide shows what the expected rates of return are for the city's investment portfolio, what's expected in the Section 115 trust in the moderate investment strategy, and then what CalPERS's investment discount rate is. As you can see, the city's investment portfolio is far lower, right? For good reason. As Mr. Barker said earlier, we are very restricted on how we can invest those funds. We've seen our investment portfolio perform better than this in recent months with interest rates rising, but this is sort of the historical average. I'll turn it over to Mr. Milazzo to speak about the expectation for the trust.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon as well. It's nice to see some of you all. I'm actually based here locally in Santa Barbara, so I'm happy to be a part of this process. So as you've been hearing, in establishing the 115 trust and allocating these funds to a long-term liability like pension, that allows, through the government code, the ability to take additional investment risk. And as you've also heard, the platform has a number of different investment strategies that range from low risk, similar to the investment strategy in your general fund, or more growth-oriented investment portfolios. Higher growth in an investment portfolio means more risk or volatility. And you might compare the greater amount of risk to what the CalPERS strategy is. And as you see here, that CalPERS strategy has a 6.8% expected return. What most municipalities and agencies select for their pension trusts is somewhere in the middle ground. And so what you see here is the expected returns for the moderate strategy being at 6.2%. We'll see more of a menu of the various different strategies that are available based on the growth component in that investment portfolio. But I think a key takeaway here is that, once again, the process allows the city to increase the earnings rate on our assets because they've been allocated towards long-term liabilities, and it also gives the city more direct control over that investment process in terms of the ability to identify how much risk, what level of expected earnings do you want to establish for the trust. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Milazzo. So it's important to talk about how the money will flow, how we will administer this trust. And it really does start with the budget process. That would be a time for council to consider the balance in the trust, how we might want to consider adding additional funds into the trust, how we might want to consider taking money out of the trust to be used to send money to CalPERS. That really is a time to be doing the planning. That's also a time to be understanding what impact we might have on our reserves, like our pension stabilization reserve. At the end of the fiscal year, per the city's reserve policy, if there is a surplus, then a portion of that should be directed towards pension reserves. That's currently in our reserve policy. In fiscal year 22, there was a surplus, there was savings, and council took an action to direct money to this pension reserve. In fiscal year 23, unfortunately, there was a deficit. So there is no surplus for the committee to consider using fiscal year 23 financials. So when there is money in our pension stabilization reserve in the general fund or our other funds, we would then transfer that money into the trust. That would be a transfer that we would authorize, and then we would immediately invest it and start earning additional earnings. And then at a later time, at the direction of our professionals and the city staff and the finance committee and city council, we would then make a decision about when we want to transfer that money directly to CalPERS. And that would actually draw down the liability going forward. But all throughout this process, the city would be able to reap the benefits of recording this additional asset on the city's financial statements that would, in effect, reduce the liability going forward. So that really is how the flow of money is planned to work. This slide here is a model. It's simply a model of what we could expect by depositing additional money into the reserve, into the trust. It's those mustardy color sections of our UAL amortization schedule here. And then the orange dotted line, it would be the expected revised UAL payment level over those out years. So instead of paying a higher level in 2031, for example, the amount of UAL we would have to pay would reduce significantly because of the additional upfront assets we would invest in the trust earlier. So it's simply a model showing that the amount we would have to pay on our liability goes down pretty significantly if we are able to make those upfront investments. So if we are successful and we achieve savings, there are options for future savings. There's options for city council. We could invest in additional capital. We could invest in our deferred maintenance. We could potentially enhance services. We could invest in our staff. There are many, many things that we could do if we are successful in achieving savings, because that money could be used for other services that the community and the council would like. I'm going to ask Mr. Milazzo to come back up. As part of opening up the trust, we will establish what's called a trust investment policy or an investment statement. And what it will do is it will dictate our investment strategy. And you can see this graph here shows different options for us to consider.
Great, thank you again. So as you see here, the pie charts or on the left side of the table here give you the different strategies from the conservative up to the capital appreciation strategy. The way I like to think about these are the equity component, the gray slice of the pie that drives the investment risk of the overall portfolio. And you can see how the moderate strategy that was shown on the previous slide falls right into the middle of the spectrum. I also noted earlier that most agencies or municipalities who are using this trust choose to adopt a strategy with less risk than the CalPERS plan. And that's really driven by the key considerations that are on the right side of the table here. The various components of the decision-making process of how do we choose a strategy. And really the key component is the time horizon metric here. How soon will the city be using the funds from the trust to fulfill those obligations that we know are coming down the road? As you heard from Mitch Barker, the trust is always available if there's an unexpected bad budget year or unexpected needs in the city's budget to spend money in other places. The trust is always available to reimburse pension-related expenses. But in general, we're making a medium-term plan. I would describe that on the timing slide that you saw earlier. And that medium term, I would recommend, allows the city to consider that moderate strategy, which, as you can see, is about a 50% equity allocation and a 50% fixed income and cash allocation. That asset class mix is what drives that 6.2% expected rate of return that you saw on the previous slide. And the key takeaway being that is clearly a much higher level than the expected returns would be for the city's general fund. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now let's talk about the other request before Finance Committee to deliver a recommendation, which is a request to put money into the trust. So this slide summarizes the year-end savings that were realized at the end of fiscal year 2022. There was savings in the amount of about $12.5 million in the general fund. The City Council adopted a resolution back in December 6th of 2022 about how that savings, how that surplus was to be allocated. And this slide summarizes that. The second item from the bottom shows that just under $1.6 million of the general fund savings in that year is to be transferred to the pension Section 115 trust. That action was already taken. No further action is required by the City Council. That cash is currently sitting in the general fund, restricted, ready to be transferred when we open the trust. We cannot just transfer general fund money to the trust. As I mentioned on a slide earlier, the general fund is not the only fund on the hook for paying down the city's pension obligation. All of the funds that have staff, that pay for staff salaries, pension benefits, and retirees are also responsible for paying their proportional fair share of the city's pension liability. This pie chart shows that about 70% is the responsibility of the general fund to pay for the city's overall pension liability. And so what staff did is develop an allocation methodology to proportionately transfer money from all of the funds that have a pension liability into the fund. So the first line shows that $1.6 million coming from the general fund, and then we have developed a methodology to transfer funds from all of these funds as well. So the initial transfer that is being requested, that staff is planning for, is just over $2.2 million. As I mentioned in the Finance Committee agenda report before you today, each one of these funds has adequate reserves in them to be able to transfer the money. So there isn't any fund that wouldn't be able to do this. So this slide shows the request of the Finance Committee again. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll be happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for this very in-depth presentation. A lot of work went into this, and I want to thank Mr. Barker and Mr. Milazzo for coming here today. Good to see you again, Mr. Milazzo. So I'll open up to questions. Member Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Agreed. Thank you very much for this presentation. Just two, I think, very quick ones. So in thinking about how this trust works, say we have 2 or 3 really, really bad years. I mean, just like terrible years in the market, we didn't make the return, and it's just not positive. Even if we had a scheduled distribution and payment to CalPERS, we can say, no, we're going to leave it in, and let time work its magic, and maybe in 5 years. I mean, so there's no, am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, Committee Member Harmon, that's exactly right. It's completely up to the city when we choose to make payments to CalPERS. That's one of the beauties of the trust. We can also work with our investment advisors to determine if we want to have a more conservative investment strategy, depending on what the market bears, or more aggressive investment strategy. We have so much more control over those assets than just sending them to CalPERS.
Awesome. Great. And then in talking about the time horizon and the impact on sort of our decision as to what our risk tolerance is, I think you said this, but I missed it and can't find it. What is our projected timing for taking that first distribution? When do we anticipate to take that first sort of lump of money out to send to CalPERS? Is that like 5 years? Do we have that time horizon identified yet?
Yeah, Committee Member Harmon, staff actually does not yet know.
Okay.
We want to put the money in the trust. We want to invest it. We want to make sure that we're managing the trust. I will ask if Mr. Barker or Mr. Milazzo want to come up and opine maybe on what their other clients have done to actually send the money to CalPERS. We would love to hear that. It really is up to each individual city when they actually choose to send that money over.
Well, and before you come up, I guess my real sort of fundamental question is, how are we determining what our risk profile is if we don't yet anticipate when we look to make that first payment? So if it's 10 years out, I might say, I'd like us to go as aggressive as possible. If it's 6 months out, obviously I want it all in cash. So how are we making that decision? Thank you.
Well, that's a very good question. That's a determining factor, if you will, for sure. We've got now 300 agencies that have adopted the 115 Trust to pre-fund pensions, so we've got lots of information, and we know what risk tolerance levels they've chosen. As Tori mentioned, the most common has been moderate, the 50-50 strategy. So broad categories, if you will, under 1 year, stay in money market. We have that as an option. 1 to 3, conservative. 3 to 5, moderately conservative. 5 to 7, moderate. 7 to 10, balance, which is 60-40, and then over 10, capital appreciation, the most aggressive. It's just sort of been the ranges. So as agencies have decided or tried to figure out when I think I might need the money, they've chosen strategies based on that. So if moderate's been the most common, they're looking in that 5 to 7 year window of time when they think they might need the money. Of course, part of the determining factor is knowing what CalPERS future costs are going to be, right? They forecast, yours are expected to go up, I think I looked at 17%. So you're going to go from roughly 53 million in contribution amount this year to 62 million, which is about a $9 million increase over time. So it really gets down to what are the numbers, and of course, how accurate is CalPERS at forecasting those numbers? And then 3, ultimately, what's the feeling of the committee and the council on, can I sleep at night still seeing the numbers with some volatility in the market? And that comes together. Originally, when the trust first came out, moderately conservative was the most common strategy. The CFO at City of Palo Alto, highly revered up there, and he kind of said, this is the way I'm going, and everybody followed his lead. And his philosophy was this: I want to earn a greater rate of return than the general fund. I'm not sending my money to CalPERS because it's too volatile. So I'm looking 3 to 5 years down the road when I think I might need the money. So ultimately, you don't know for sure. You're making your best guess.
And to Mr. DeMartini's point, we can toggle that up and down if, at a moment's notice, I presume?
Within a
or
week, we can make a
24 hours
change.
or whatever?
Yep.
Okay, and.
If I can add to that, can
Yeah,
I just
please,
real quick,
sorry.
if I may, Councilmember Harmon? So in the pension management policy that's before you today as well, there's at least an annual check-in with the Finance Committee. We'll make a presentation to you. We'll talk about what investment returns we have earned in the trust. We can receive your feedback about whether or not we want to consider making a payment to CalPERS, change our investment policy. That's at least annually, but that does not preclude us from coming at any time if council chooses for us to come, or if we think that there's something important for the committee to consider.
Awesome.
Yeah, one more key point on that additional payment. It's called ADP, additional discretionary payment. I've seen a decrease in agencies' desire to do that because of the recent earnings of CalPERS. 2 years ago, they had a negative year. We know about last year, 5.8, underneath 6.8. So the idea is I'm not sending extra money to them because if you were to send it to them, one, they amortize it over a long period of time. So your positive effect on any 1 year's reduction in cost is minimal. 2, if you have a bad budget year and you're going, I need the money back, it's not going to happen. So the trust gives you the opportunity to get the money back if you need it, and 2, again, decide what's your risk tolerance level.
Awesome.
CalPERS only has one risk tolerance level, and it's aggressive, as we know. So, but I'm probably out of my swim lane, so I'm going to pass it back to you.
I'll just confirm that we regularly update investment policy statements with agencies just on an ongoing basis. It really becomes a living document in terms of the oversight of the trust.
Awesome, thank you. And just one final question, if I may. And I'm sorry this is a bit awkward to ask, but what are the advisory fees that we're paying?
That's a very good question. Again, those are all important. It's 0.25% for PARS Trust Administration Services. It's 0.35% for the investment management / trustee services. It's a tiered fee schedule, so as the assets grow, the fees go down. Yes.
If I may add to that as well, sorry. The amount that we'll be paying our professionals to manage and invest in the trust will be much less than the planned additional earnings that we will achieve in the trust.
All right, thank you. And I just have a couple questions. Those were excellent questions and put around. So just to clarify, we still would be making the upfront payment to the UAL, which is about 32 million that we make and saves us that million. So this is in addition to that. I just want to make that clear.
Yes, Chair Friedman, that is correct.
And then the unfunded liability is approaching 40 to 45 million. And what percentage is it? 70% general fund, or I forget which slide. I just wanted that 45 or 40 million wasn't all general fund. It's split among the different funds, if I understand correctly.
So just to confirm, the Chair Friedman, the unfunded actuarial liability on the city's balance sheet is over $400 million.
I was talking about
Total.
the annual.
Oh, the annual,
The
yes.
annual that we're having to pay the 40 to
Yes.
45 million. Sorry.
Yeah,
that
no,
we have
that's
to pay.
no problem. That's the graph here on the right. So this graph here on the right on slide 10 shows what the annual contribution is to pay down the UAL. That's how much we pay annually,
And that's all the funds.
all the funds. So then on slide, if you give me just one moment. On slide 23, this is the proposed annual allocation. So the general fund is responsible for approximately 70% of the total unfunded liability, including that annual payment.
Okay, perfect. And then my last question, as we're moving forward, due to the high cost of living here in Santa Barbara, there's different strategies for employee compensation. And one of it is, since there isn't there's a lack of affordable housing, is that we have to pay our staff more. And that was one of the 4 bullets, is you can invest in your staff, which would increase salary compensation, which would then increase the pensions cost that we have. So this would this be a tool to help us mitigate that in the long run, if we're going to be able to want to take a strategy to invest more in our staff, if we're putting additional resources away where we're getting a higher rate of return to kind of offset that additional pressure on the pensions?
Chair Freeman, that's an excellent question. Yes, the answer is yes. And so if we are successful and invest and earn additional earnings in the trust, eventually send that money to CalPERS, it will reduce our UAL, our liability, which will in turn reduce the annual payment we have to make to CalPERS for our UAL contribution, which means that money is freed up to be spent on other initiatives.
And then my last question, this is actually the inverse of Member Harmon's question, is say we have a terrible year, but we do have some in the 115, but we're facing a dilemma of having to pay that $40 million UAL, or whatever it is at the time. Could we, if the choice was to make significant cuts in our budget at the time, could we actually use that as part of our yearly UAL, if we so chose, if we were in a situation where there was service level reductions? That would be tough to swallow.
Yes, again, Chair Friedman, great question. I think that is one of the comments that Mr. Barker made earlier, is that yes, we have discretion about how we use the resources in the trust. It could be used to make an additional discretionary payment to CalPERS, or it can be used to partially offset like our annual contribution that we have to make for the UAL.
That's what I want to
we have
clarify,
discretion.
that we could use it to partially offset that if we got into a situation where we wanted to do that. So, okay. And I don't have any further questions. And any other questions before I open up to public comment? Any members of the public wish to speak to this item? I don't see any in chambers, so I'll close chambers. Are there any members online who wish to speak to this item? Please raise your hand in the app.
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
All right, I will bring it back to the committee. Member Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Well, this is an excellent approach, and thank you very much, Mr. DeMartini, for bringing this to us and educating us about it, and as well, thank you very much to both of you. and it has been a learning process for sure, but I'm really grateful that we're here. This seems like the best possible option in a not too awesome situation. So, yeah, I really appreciate this, and I would like us to take as full advantage as possible. And I certainly trust your judgment, the judgment of your staff, and appreciate that this will be coming back to the Finance Committee yearly to update us. But my position is go, go, go. So thank you very much. I think future city councils will be very, very grateful to you and your staff and you guys for doing this for them/us. So with that said, I'm happy to move staff recommendation.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second?
And any comments?
I just want to thank city staff for taking on this homework assignment and just echoing what Ms. Harmon just said. So thank you.
All right, and I too, I'm going to be supporting this, and I want to thank Mr. Milazzo and Mr. Barker for coming down today, and I learned a lot. I didn't even know what PAR was before reading this staff report, and to see that there are literally hundreds of agencies that are doing this gives me comfort because we're not the first to do it. And then I also want to thank Mr. DiMartini, you and all your staff for the last 2 years. This is a lot of effort, a lot of work within this. You called her out. I'll call out Ms. Yates again. Since you gave her a shout out, I learned a lot through this, and I'll just say that, you know, when I'm on council, people say, what do you enjoy about it? It's actually this stuff that I enjoy a lot because you're just kind of learning how the city works and the complexities that go into it. And this will give us more tools to mitigate the risk of our pensions in it, and hopefully it will give us some more flexibility to really get at some of our compensation issues and retaining our staff and providing those higher level of services in the long run. It's not going to solve the whole thing, but it gets us in a step in the right direction than if we otherwise hadn't taken or don't take this action. So I'll be definitely supportive of it and want to thank all those involved in getting it to us over the past couple of years. So with that, the motion has been made and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Not hearing any. Passes unanimously. And thank you to everyone, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.